A soft, insistent tapping on the tin roof of the old farmhouse, like 1,000 tiny fingers drumming a forgotten rhythm. Outside, the world was awash of gray and black. The cornfields stretched out into the inky darkness, their stalks rustling, and bowing to a wind that swept across the flat open land of rural Ohio. It was the kind of wind that sounded lonely, like it had traveled a long, long way just to rattle the loose pane in the kitchen window and make the screen door swing on its rusty hinges with a mournful creak. 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 Inside, the only light came from a single, bare bulb hanging over the kitchen table. Its buzzing was a constant low hum against the symphony of the storm. It cast a sickly yellow glow on the worn linoleum, the chipped formica countertop and the dust motes dancing in the heavy air. You know that sound an old house makes when it settles? A deep groan from its wooden bones, as if it's sighing under the weight of its own history. This house was full of those sighs I was supposed to be writing, you see. A novelist trying to escape the city's ceaseless noise, to find the quiet pulse of a story. I'd rented this place for a song, an isolated speck on a map where the nearest neighbor was a mile of muddy track away. The listing called it a rustic retreat. Right now it just felt old and empty, the kind of emptiness that feels watchful. I was staring out the window, watching the rain slant down in silvery sheets. When I first heard it, it wasn't the house settling, and it wasn't the wind. It was a sound from outside, somewhere in the direction of the old barn that stood like a hunched shadow against the horizon. A soft thudding, rhythmic, almost methodical. Thump, thump, thump. I told myself it was just a loose shutter banging in the wind, or a branch that had fallen from the ancient oak tree by the fence line, but the rhythm was too steady, too deliberate. It was the sound of something being struck or something striking the ground. My heart began a slow, heavy drum beat of its own, a counterpoint to the sound in the distance. I locked the back door, the deadbolt sliding home with a loud, definitive click that seemed to be swallowed by the house's oppressive silence. The thudding stopped, just like that. The sudden absence of the noise was somehow more unnerving than the sound itself. I stood there, listening, for a long time, hearing nothing but the rain and my own ragged breathing. That night, sleep was a shallow, restless sea. I kept dreaming of the cornfields, of running through endless rows of whispering stalks. Something always just behind me, its footsteps matching the thudding I'd heard earlier. I woke up to the weak, gray light of dawn, feeling as though I hadn't slept at all. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and dripping. Determined to shake off the night's paranoia, I decided to explore, to prove to myself that the thudding was nothing more than a product of an overactive imagination, fueled by isolation. I pulled on my boots, the mud sucking at them with each step as I crossed the yard towards the barn. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. The barn was even more derelict up close than it had appeared from the house. Its red paint had peeled away to reveal weathered, silvered wood, and the great doors hung slightly askew, one of them swinging gently in the breeze. A section of the barn's stone foundation had crumbled away on the far side, leaving a dark, gaping hole. Curiosity, that dangerous, nagging impulse, pulled me toward it. I peered into the darkness, my eyes slowly adjusting. It was a crawl space filled with cobwebs and the debris of 100 years, and something else. In the far corner, half buried in the dirt, was a small wooden chest bound with rusted iron straps. My writer's brain kicked in immediately. A hidden treasure? A time capsule? The unease of the previous night was momentarily forgotten, replaced by a thrill of discovery. I squeezed through the opening in the foundation, the damp earth cold against my hands as I crawled towards the chest. It was heavier than it looked, and it took all my strength to drag it out into the daylight. The lock was old and corroded. A few solid blows with a rock from the foundation was all it took to break it. The lid creaked open, releasing a cloud of musty air. Inside, there was no treasure. Just a collection of old leather-bound journals, their pages yellowed and brittle with age, and beneath them, something that made my blood run cold. A tangled mess of what looked like hand-carved wooden dolls, each one crudely shaped, no bigger than my hand. Their faces were featureless, just smooth, rounded heads, but tied around each one's neck was a small, tattered piece of fabric. A scrap of plaid from a shirt, a piece of lace from a dress collar, a bit of faded calico. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. This wasn't a time capsule. This felt like a grave. I took the journals back to the house, leaving the box and its disturbing contents where they lay. I sat at the kitchen table, the afternoon sun streaming through the window, and opened the first journal. The handwriting was a looping, elegant script. The ink faded to a rusty brown. The entries were dated, starting in 1888. They were written by a woman named Elspeth Miller, the wife of the farmer who had built this very house. Her early entries were mundane, filled with the details of a hard but hopeful life on the frontier, planting corn, mending fences, the birth of her first child, a boy named Samuel. But as the months turned into years, a thread of anxiety began to weave itself through her words. She wrote of strange occurrences, tools disappearing from the barn only to reappear in the house, whispers heard on the wind when no one was around, shadows that moved in the cornfields at dusk. She wrote about the land. "There is a wrongness to this soil," she wrote one night. "It feels hungry. The corn grows tall and quick, unnaturally so, but the stalks whisper secrets in the night. And sometimes I swear I see faces in the patterns of the leaves." Then the entries took a darker turn. She began to write about a local legend, a story whispered by the few other settlers in the area, a tale the native tribes had warned their ancestors about. They called it the Taker of Echoes, an entity, they said, that was tied to the land. An ancient thing that slept for generations, only to wake when it sensed loneliness. It didn't want your life, not in the way a predator does. It wanted your story, your memories, your laughter, your tears, your connections to others. It would take your echo in the world, leaving behind a hollow shell, a person who was physically present but empty, forgotten by everyone who had ever known them. "What if," she wrote, her script growing frantic and jagged, "what if it's not just a story? What if that's what happened to the Abernathy's farmstead 5 miles east? They just vanished. The house was left as it was, dinner still on the table. The neighbors said they never knew them at all, claimed that farm had been empty for years, but I remember them. I remember Mrs. Abernathy's laugh. Am I the only one?" The journal entries became a chronicle of her growing terror. She started, seeing a figure at the edge of the cornfields, a tall, spindly thing that was more shadow than substance. It would just stand there, watching the house. Her husband, Josiah, saw nothing. He told her she was tired, that the isolation was getting to her. He didn't hear the whispers. He didn't see the shadow. "It is watching Samuel," she wrote, the ink smudged as if by tears. "My boy. He talks to it. He calls it the Whisper Man. He says it promises him games, tells him secrets of the earth. Josiah sees only a child's imagination. But I see the emptiness creeping into my son's eyes. Yesterday he couldn't remember his own grandfather's name, a name he has known since he could speak." The climax of the journal was a single, terrifying entry. "Josiah is gone. He went out to the barn last night to check on a sick calf and never came back. I found his hat lying in the mud this morning. The calf is fine. I went to our nearest neighbors, the Carvers, for help. They looked at me with blank eyes." "Josiah?" Mrs. Carver asked. "I don't recall any Josiah Miller. Haven't you always been a widow, Elspeth?" They didn't remember him. My husband of 10 years. It has taken his echo. It has erased him. My hands were shaking as I read the final pages. Elspeth described how she started carving the small wooden figures. She wrote that she couldn't bear the thought of her son being completely erased, so she created a vessel for his memory. A small doll, carved from the wood of the old oak tree. She tied a piece of his favorite shirt around its neck. "If it takes him," she wrote, "this will remember. This wood, this cloth. Something must remember." The last entry was short, almost illegible. It is in the house. I hear it whispering his name from the walls. I have locked him in the cellar. I have to face it. I have to try to make a bargain. If you are reading this, know that we were here. We lived. Remember us. The journal ended there. I sat back, the silence of the kitchen pressing in on me. I looked out the window at the barn, at the crumbling foundation where the chest had been hidden. A chest full of dolls. A chest full of echoes. Josiah, the Abernathys, and how many others. Each doll a forgotten life. A story erased from the world, held only by a scrap of fabric and a piece of carved wood. The thudding I'd heard. What if it wasn't a branch? What if it was the sound of someone carving? A floorboard creaked upstairs. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I was alone in the house, I knew I was, but the sound was unmistakable. A slow, dragging footstep. Then another. It was coming from the room directly above the kitchen, the master bedroom. "Hello?" I called out, my voice a pathetic squeak. The absurdity of it hit me even as I said it. Who did I expect to answer? The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, expectant. I thought about Elspeth's last words. "It is in the house." I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a cast-iron skillet from the stove, and crept towards the stairs. Every step I took seemed to echo through the unnatural quiet. The air grew colder as I ascended, the sunlight from the downstairs windows not quite reaching the shadowed upper landing. The door to the master bedroom was slightly ajar. I could see a sliver of the room inside, a corner of a dusty four-poster bed, a patch of faded wallpaper. Pushing the door open with the edge of the skillet, I peered inside. The room was empty. Dust lay thick on every surface, undisturbed, for what must have been years. The bed was stripped down to a bare, stained mattress. The windows were grimy, casting a dim, watery light into the space. There was nothing here. No one. Relief and foolishness washed over me. Of course there was. No one here. The story in the journal had gotten to me, that's all. I was a writer, prone to flights of fancy. The house was old. The sounds were normal. I was turning to leave when my eyes caught something on the floor, half hidden under the bed. A small wooden doll. It was identical to the ones in the chest, featureless and crude, but this one was different. Around its neck was a piece of modern nylon fabric, bright blue, the exact color and material of the windbreaker I had hung by the back door. When I arrived, I backed away slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. The skillet felt useless in my hand. I turned and ran, not even bothering to be quiet. I scrambled down the stairs, my feet slipping on the worn wood. I didn't stop for my laptop, my wallet, nothing. I just ran. Out the back door, across the muddy yard towards my car. As I fumbled with my keys, my hand shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. I chanced to look back at the house, and in the upstairs window, the window of the master bedroom, a figure was standing. It was tall and spindly, a silhouette of impossible angles against the dim light of the room, a shadow that seemed to drink the light around it. It wasn't moving, it was just watching me. The Whisper Man, the taker of echoes. The car engine roared to life, and I peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't look back again. I drove for hours, not stopping until the sun began to set, putting as much distance between myself and that farmhouse as I possibly could. I'm in a motel now, hundreds of miles away, the kind of anonymous place where the air smells of bleach and desperation. I'm trying to write this all down, to make sense of it, to convince myself it was real, but a new fear is creeping in, a fear more profound than the shadow in the window. My memories of the past few days, they're becoming hazy. The name of the town where I rented the farmhouse, I can't quite recall it. The face of the real estate agent who gave me the keys, it's a blur. The details are fading like an old photograph left out in the sun. Little things at first. But what if it's not just the little things? What if one day I can't remember my own mother's face or the sound of my sister's laugh? What if the people I love wake up one morning and find they have no memory of me at all? I keep touching the pocket of my jeans where I keep my car keys. The keychain is a silly little souvenir my niece gave me. A plastic dolphin with my name, Alex, written on it in glittery letters. Keep pulling it out just to look at it, just to remember my own name. The rain has started again, tapping at the motel room window. It sounds just like it did at the farmhouse. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between the thunderclaps, I can almost hear a whisper, carried on the wind from a lonely cornfield hundreds of miles away. It's a soft, inviting sound, and it seems to be whispering a question I'm too afraid to answer. What if you were never really there at all? Thank you for listening tonight. Sweet dreams.